Okay, so we are talking about Parkinson's law today, and that's not to be confused with Parkinson's disease. It's a whole different guy, so hopefully it'll be more exciting and maybe less depressing. Parkinson's law was kind of coined back in 1955 by a guy named Northcote Parkinson. But he said, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. And at the time that he said that, he was really kind of criticizing some bureaucrats for their lack of efficiency. It got picked up by people, and they kind of grabbed a hold of it, and so he kind of became known for that phrase. And then so he decided to go ahead and write a book, and so he wrote a book. I think it was called Parkinson's Law, and he kind of expanded on that and talked about some different aspects of Parkinson's Law as well. So I've got right now a list of some laws that kind of come from Parkinson's Law. A few of these come from the ideas that he had in his book, and a few of them are just creatively my own that I'm adjusting to the company a bit. So whatever you don't intentionally design will be designed for you. Okay, whatever you don't intentionally design will be designed for you. And we can run most of these through that equation as we go as well, and you kind of see how that works. So they all have some kind of the base, the core in common, but yet we're still dealing with different elements of our world. So the first one that made him famous here was it was the law. Basically, I'm calling it the law of wasted time. I'm calling it the law of wasted time. It states that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So I'll bet this doesn't take a lot of explanation. It basically says if you've got a 2-hour project and you give yourself 5 hours to do it in, you're not going to work as hard, and you're going to stretch it out, and it's going to take 5 hours. You guys ever experienced that before? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all have. Sometimes our days off are like that, right? Mm-hmm. but I think on your days off, it's okay, because that's what it's for. It's sometimes days off, or that's your rest time. So if you've got things to do, you can do it. But what we're really talking about here is when it's time that is designated for you to perform, for you to be in your job or doing a service for somebody, that type of thing. So work expands to fill the time available for its completion. And we're gonna summarize all of these right now, and then we'll go into each one a little bit more detailed. So, and the second one then is the law of money. And basically that means that money paid out rises to meet income. If you got it, you'll spend it. Yeah. And so this is kind of the law that says if you don't intentionally design your budget, it'll be designed for you by your appetite. Okay, for your appetite for stuff or whatever. And so that's kind of how that works with the law of money. But it's still the same thing. It's what happens when you're not intentional about it, and something happens by default instead. The third law then is the law of spatial erosion. And I know that's kind of a fancy term there, but really what it means is stuff expands to take up the space available for storage. Anybody moved into a bigger home thinking that you're going to have far more room for all your stuff, and then it just fills back up? Yeah, that's basically, it's following Parkinson's law. And anybody that has struggled with any kind of hoarding or live with somebody that struggles with hoarding knows that's exactly what happens. It's just going to fill back up. You can kind of see the similarities into how it deals with time and money and space. They're all very similar. If you don't fill it up with something else that's more valuable, it'll get filled up with something less valuable. So the law of communication. This is a quote that says, "The void created by the failure to communicate is soon filled with poison, drivel, and misrepresentation." So this is Parkinson's quote. So he's talking about communication. So when we fail to communicate, then the understanding is going to be something different than what you would have liked for them to understand. It's going to be filled with poison, drivel, or misrepresentation. And so whatever is supposed to be communicated that isn't is going to be replaced by something less desirable, right? So if you don't design what people hear, they're going to design what they understand instead of you. And number 5, the law of shared inefficiency. So this is the number of people in any working group tends to increase irrespective of the amount of work to be completed. Basically what that means is if there's 5 of you working on a project, why not get 6? That way everybody else can do a little bit less, right? Sometimes, or, I've seen this in a store too. I've walked in the store before and there's 3 people working on a task in the back room and it's the simplest task. the more important task is being ignored. I've walked in and seen 3 people sorting through their spinach at one time, like, what are you doing? There's, dough to be chopped or whatever. But so sometimes we can kind of flock to whatever's simplest. And it seems like more people are drawn to those things. So the law of shared inefficiency. The law of procrastination. If there's a way to delay an important decision or action, we will find it. So it's really easy to do that. All of us struggle with this to some degrees. Some people might be a little bit less drawn because they maybe have worked past some of these in the past, but everybody's going to struggle with procrastination to some degree. And then 7th, the last one, is the law of complacency. Complacency expands continuously to fill the space available for it as well. So when we're allowed to be complacent, it's kind of like an addiction. We want more, or maybe think of the word comfort in place of complacency. We get addicted to comfort, and so it's easy to fall into that trap. So we're gonna break down these a little bit more clearly here. So the law of wasted time. Here's a chart that gives you an idea here. So if you've got 2 hours available, you got a little chart here. Your vertical line here is the amount of effort, or at least upfront effort or consolidated effort, and then time is the horizontal. So if you've got 2 hours allotted, and you've got a task that requires a bit of effort, or at least speed and working hard for a time, and you can get that done. But now you're allowed 3 hours, you'll stretch that out. But if you're allowed 8 hours, you'll stretch that out even more. And that's just kind of a universal law. That's the way our bodies work and our minds work when we're left unchecked. And that's a key phrase, because there's things we can do to put ourselves in check with that. But the way I see this with our company is that sometimes we can do this with prep. If we're clicking on all cylinders, we can get prep done maybe by noon sometimes, but yet it's a Monday, so we just let it stretch out. We end up getting done by 3. And we do that because we can, but partially because we're not thinking about what we could be doing with that extra 3 hours if we were to really bust it out. And if we were to be efficient and knock it out earlier, then you're gaining time to be used as a resource to better your position in the workplace. Sometimes we mistake the amount of work for effort, and that's not the same. This first part of the chart here, this 2 hours, this is the same amount of work as the third, which is 8 hours. It's the same amount of work. The difference is that it's more consolidated up front in the first one. But then after the work's done, then there's 6 hours of nothing. So there's no work that next 6 hours. So you have to look at it in a big picture. Whereas this 8 hours, maybe you're not working as hard up front, but you're still working those last 6 hours. Make sense? So as far as work, there's actually a formula for work. There's not any more work being done in this first than the second. So it's not going to make you go home any tireder. It's just going to go home. You're just going to go home a little later because you're procrastinating. You're not getting stuff done as fast as you could. So that's a law of wasted time, and kind of a visual on that. Parkinson's law and your money. So spending expands as to fill the level of your income. This certainly does have a lot to do with our work and our jobs, but you guys can probably make the application personally even more. I know I can. It's so much easier when you have a cushion to spend than when you don't have a cushion, right? And so eating into that is a temptation that Parkinson's law kind of demonstrates. In our company, that could be maybe if the resources are available, then you go ahead and use them. Maybe that's placing a truck order. Maybe it's over ordering or cushioning your truck order, or maybe your labor as well. You're given a certain amount of hours as a forecast, but you feel like you could do it more, but you could do it better than that, but you use all the money that you can use. You're kind of falling into this a little bit. Parkinson's law and communication. So this is another quote by Mr. Parkinson. It says, "The void created by the failure to communicate is soon filled with poison, drivel, and misrepresentation." Anybody experienced that before? You forget to tell somebody something and then it's replaced by something else? Yeah, and the key here is that it's the void created by the failure to communicate. This doesn't even talk about if you communicate the wrong thing to people. This is just saying if you just don't communicate when you're supposed to, it's a void. Another quote that has to do with this is, "Where words are few, expectations are up for interpretations." So how do we apply this to our company? How does this deal with maybe our daily communications? How do you guys see this playing out as a problem?
I would have to say, not thoroughly communicating, whether it's just tasks or prep. If you leave room for not explaining something in full or thoroughly, they might come up with their own way of doing something if you didn't show them the right way. And that's not really their fault. They just didn't know. So they're filling it with what they weren't communicated with. Does that kind of make sense?
Yep. Yep. And the thing is it doesn't matter if you communicated it well the day before, because that was yesterday. And people just don't have as intentional of memories as we would like to think that they have. We think just because we told them last week or the week before that, or if they learned it in training, then it's going to stick with them now. How many times have you guys gone through a thorough orientation with somebody and you've mapped out specifically some expectations, and 2 months later they're like, well, you never told me.
Yep.
Well, actually we did. We covered it in the orientation. And the problem is because we don't say it enough. We don't communicate it enough, or it doesn't get backed up with, seeing other people do it or having it be part of the culture. So communication is really important. What we don't say is really, really dangerous. So stuff expands to take up the space available for storage, or another way to put it, the bigger the house, the more crap. So with the law of spatial erosion, then, this really applies to things gathering up, right? If you've got space for things to gather, it's going to gather up. So I think of sometimes when I walk into the office of one of you guys or a few of you guys, I'll look around, I'll think, wow, what a mess. This is kind of chaotic. And then other times I walk into other people's office and it's like nice and clean and organized. And sometimes because there's space on the desk, we put stuff there. And then stuff just kind of gathers because there's space for it. And so we have to proactively work, intentionally be different than that. So the Parkinson's law is basically saying, hey, we tend to gather stuff. We tend to use up this space, even if it's not efficient to do it. And so we have to work against that. This works in different other areas of the store as well. Maybe it's your shelves in the cooler. Maybe you're unorganized with your shelves and maybe you've got too much product because you've got too much space. I've seen people, take a shelf out of their cooler because they had too much product and they were over ordering and they had too much of a cushion. They took that out and they only had a certain amount of space left. And so that kind of helped them. Maybe it's your make lines, underneath the make lines, maybe you're disorganized in there and you got too much junk sitting in there. And so by sorting through that daily and really limiting the amount of stuff that's in there and not taking up all the space just because there is a lot of space in there, maybe that can be wise to do as well. So the law of shared inefficiency. So this is just the idea that why should 4 of us work at 80% when 5 of us can work at 60%? When have we seen this before, guys? Somebody give me a scenario of how this plays out in our stores.
Sometimes when after the push comes and I find people walking up to the sauce and cheese ticket area and maybe they're just curious to what's coming up next instead of getting the station that they're at ready, whether they're filling things or whether they're tackling cleaning the line or doing other things that are getting you ready for what's coming next.
Yep. Or maybe it's a day where we're just a little slower than we thought we were going to be, and we got, maybe it's a Friday and we got 5 people working, and we're just not getting hit like we thought we were going to get hit. We're selling less, and so rather than sending people home and staying efficient, we just keep that extra person, and then everybody gets to work a little bit less. And so you spread out the job across more people to make it easier. If you're a high school kid and your manager didn't talk you into position and you are, kind of running that shift that night and no one ever talks to you about the business part of this or gives any kind of boundaries or limitations, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you just make things easier on yourself by keeping everybody and just getting everybody to have an easier job for that night? Sometimes we can blame people when they know better, but we can't blame anybody if they don't know any better, if they don't understand the concept of efficiency and that it's a business and we're trying to be profitable. And if we don't communicate those things, we leave those things out, then this is just kind of what happens by default when we don't fill that space with good communications and set good expectations with our people. We've talked about the 60-90 effect as well in our company, and it's pretty much the same thing. It's really the 60-90 effect says if you allow people to work at 60%, most of them will. A few of them will still work harder than that because that's their work ethic. But if you expect them to work at 90%, some of them will, but some of them still won't. So the whole idea is that some people will work as little as they have to, and some will work as much as they can. And so much of that has to do with what we expect and the example that we set for them and the expectations and just the motivation that we give them, the inspiration that we give them to work hard together to experience success together. When everybody's working independently for themselves, everybody's going to do as little as they have to, really. So anyway, that's the law of shared inefficiencies. So we see this in our company all the time. It can also play out with the schedule. Maybe a manager isn't very comfortable pushing their people to get better. And so rather than putting their people in a position where they need to be quick, they'll just give them an extra person and pad the schedule so that their employees don't have to work harder and complain. We've all seen that before too, right? People that just really don't want to work any more than 60 or 70%. They just really don't have any reason to do that because they're really kind of thinking about themselves rather than the success of the store. And sometimes if a manager doesn't have that confidence and the leverage to be able to do that and to push people and challenge people to get better, then they just won't get any better. So Parkinson's law and procrastination. So if you have ample time at your disposal, the more likely you are to relax, laze around, spend, and delay. But when the deadline appears close, you streamline all of your attention to complete the task. Anybody pulled an all-nighter in college? Take a bunch of no-dos and and just cram the night before and don't go to sleep? I've done that before. And then the quote, if you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute to do, right? Some people are really motivated by hard deadlines, but they're very unmotivated by soft deadlines. In other words, it's hard to get it done a day early because you don't have to. So it's easier to get motivated if you just wait till the deadline and then you have to, and then you kick it into another gear. Well, that's because you're waiting and you're relying on an external force to give you the motive to do something. So you're relying on an external force to do that. What if you didn't have to rely on an external force? What if you had an internal force that could choose to do that anyway? That's when you really get into efficient people that have an internal boundaries, an internal force, a battery inside of them that pushes them to do something and doesn't rely on an external force or a deadline or accountability from somebody else to do it. Somebody with an internal drive will get it done anyway, even if they're not supervised or even if there's no deadline. And so really it's about replacing your deadline, creating your own deadline instead of waiting for somebody else to impose a deadline, right? Some people do their taxes before they have to, and a lot of people wait till the last day to do their taxes. Okay, so Parkinson's law of complacency. Complacency expands continuously to fill the space available for it. Complacency is basically just when you don't do anything, when you just sit there. We don't want to turn the safety net into a hammock that lulls able-bodied people into complacency and dependence. Paul Ryan said that. And then there's an ancient proverb that says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. And so it really goes to show that complacency is addictive. Once it starts going, it's like gangrene. It's like an infection. It gets worse and worse. So you have to head off complacency before it gets bad. Complacency is really what fills the gap so often with our time and our efforts and just progress. And it really kind of works us in reverse. It works against us. So, all right. So those are more detailed of the laws here. So now I want to talk about how we can use this principle and what we know about it to our advantage. All right. So feel free to jump in with any comments on this as well. But so the first, I think I've got 6 or 7 of these, but the first one is these are basically practical things that we can do to combat Parkinson's law in our work. So continually reduce the time allotted to your tasks. Aim to challenge yourself to grow. Okay, first in your personal tasks, and second in tasks you delegate. And then develop an internal sense of urgency that leads to an external culture of urgency. So what this means is time yourself. When I train people how to do prep or work on the store, I talk about this all the time. For those of you that I trained, You've heard me talk about, the 5-second rule, how we limit our expectations and we set a standard that's better than what we would do naturally, right? And the 5-second rule is one of those things. Or you guys have watched me do prep, and I don't typically just take my time and use up all of the time that's available to me. And some of you have heard me talk about how if we're going to make a pizza in the middle of the afternoon and there's nobody there in the lobby and you still have 20 minutes to get it done, make it fast, because when you practice making pizzas fast, you get good at making fast pizzas. When you practice making pizzas slow, you get good at making slow pizzas. Make every pizza fast and efficient. And so you guys have heard me talk about a lot of that if you've worked with me in the kitchen, and many of you are really good at this too, probably better than me in a lot of cases. So part of it is measure yourself, time yourself, and then work to reduce that allotted time for your tasks. I remember timing myself on chopping dough and then trying to get a little bit better, 10 or 15 seconds faster each batch of dough I would chop, and I would time myself on how long it takes to sheet, a tote of large dough balls. And then I would keep working on that. So that's one way you can do that, is keep reducing the allotted time, and it keeps pushing you and it's challenging you. So the opposite of this would just be start working at your normal pace and see how long it takes. And however long it takes is however long it takes. Whatever you don't get done, you don't get done. See the difference?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Anybody experienced that before? Anybody had to make the transition from working at a natural speed to working at a intentional speed?
Definitely me. When I first started to learn how to do things faster than before, and then one day it just felt like it clicked, and that switch went on, and then it became fun. Every time I would do it, like, for example, lately it's been with cheese. So I'm probably one of the select few that loves shredding cheese. I love it. It feels like a workout and it's a challenge, and I love it. So I knew that the average was 10 minutes, and 8 minutes was excellence. And so I got to 9 minutes eventually, and then I'm like, I gotta push this only one more minute. And I finally got there. It was a lot of fun, and it was really rewarding, just personally rewarding.
So number 2, fully commit to your desired outcome or your purpose. Determined to rise to the challenge, whatever it takes. Being fully committed is really, really important, and it gets you through tougher times. Adrenaline kicks in and it kicks you into the next gear. Use your advantage and learn to master, your adrenaline. Learn to use that. I love that atmosphere when I have to roll up my sleeves and kick it into another gear and just get after it. It's stimulating to me. It's for whatever reason, I love to do that. It's a challenge, and we can't do that if we're not fully committed. And so what I mean by fully committed, that can apply to a lot of things. Being fully committed could mean being fully committed to getting everything done by 3 p.m. so that you'll be locked and loaded for that night. Being fully committed could be fully committed to staffing your store and doing whatever it takes to get your store staffed. Being fully committed could be to getting my store so that it's profitable to a certain degree within a 4-month period. And I'm going to do anything I can to get it going. I'm going to work on this and work on that and focus on the numbers. Or it could be fully committed to learn a number of things, or fully committed to become the best you can possibly be by daily working on yourself and making yourself better. All of those happen only when you're committed. If you're half committed, you'll never accomplish it. In fact, it's interesting. It really is a universal law that if you're not fully committed, you're always going to fall short of expectation. It's just the way it is. Why would your results are never going to be higher than your commitment. So if you're half committed, you're never really going to be, you're not going to get the results of somebody that's fully committed. If that makes sense. So, all right. Number 3, always work goal-oriented, not time-oriented. This can be a challenge for people who are being promoted from an hourly position to a salaried position, because you're time oriented. You're kind of used to thinking, okay, I'm coming in at 10 o'clock and I'm leaving at 6 o'clock, or I'm leaving at 7 o'clock. And so I'm working this 9-hour shift, and that's what I do. I'm putting in my time. But when you're a general manager, you don't get paid by time, you get paid by results. So you have to change your thinking from being time oriented to more results oriented. Make sense? Or goal oriented. You want to achieve things. And if you can spend less time and hit your goals and achieve it, then great. And then you spend a little bit less time doing it. But if it takes a little bit more, then you take a little bit more. That's part of what the commitment is. And when you're not time oriented, that doesn't bother you so much. And I know many of you are terrific at this. You think this way. You just think in terms of, well, hey, it's my responsibility. We got to get it done. And because you're efficient, you get things done. You're normally getting things done early. You're doing it efficiently enough that you've got a margin at the end of the evening. And so you're not always pushed to work later than you're supposed to, because you've got these things in place, and because you've put these goals in place to complete rather than just to work out your time. Always assign a time for completion, a finish line, benchmarks, and that ensures timeless and efficiency. In our red book, this is the reason why we put a time in our red book for our finish line. And then we have also the benchmarks, where we put a time in our benchmark. That's why we put those in there. So we have little mini goals to work towards that set up to finish a certain amount of things within a couple of hours. And then you move on to your next benchmark and your next one. Think of them as like mile markers along the road, so you know where you're at. Your benchmarks will tell you how you're doing. If you're on target and you're hitting your benchmarks, then you're on the right trajectory to finish what you're supposed to finish by the time you're supposed to finish it. Your 3 o'clock is on target if you know that you're hitting your benchmarks. Your finish lines and benchmarks should always be challenging, but it's attainable. Like, you shouldn't be setting your finish lines to be easy. That's what Parkinson's law says. If you can do something in 4 hours, don't give yourself 6 hours to do it just because that's what you can give yourself. Give yourself 4 hours to do it and push yourself, and then figure out something to do with those extra 2 hours that's productive, that you can get done above and beyond what you normally would have. That's how people get ahead. That's how the effective and efficient leaders in the restaurant world get ahead of things. That's how they clear space to be able to do some of the extracurricular things, like look at their numbers and hone in on things and plan out their next week and research and look into things. That's how they get that extra margin of space, by finishing earlier than they have to. So be afraid of under communicating. Okay, so be afraid of under communicating, because really bad things can happen when you under communicate. Your job isn't to tell them the expectations, it's to gain certainty that is fully understood. So get confirmation. Y'all understand what this means? How many times have you heard somebody say, well, I told them? Yeah, but did they hear you? Did they understand what you meant? Did you get confirmation that they told you? Because, if you go back to the other person, they can say, no, you didn't tell me. I didn't know anything about it. But sometimes you can remove all doubt by getting that head nod, looking at them in the eyes and saying, hey, just so you know, here's what I want you to do. And it's written in the red book. Can you take care of this before you go home tonight? And you get the head nod and they say, yes, I will do that. Well, there's no mistake then. You're not just telling them. You've actually gained certainty that they fully understood. And that's the difference. See, a leader's obligation is not to tell people things. A leader's obligation is to make sure that people understand things. There's a big difference. Have you guys seen that play out where maybe we take a shortcut and we only do the minimal and tell people, and then it ends up biting you? Never assume. Previously communicated expectations fade quickly. Like a battery, it needs to be recharged daily with repetition. So make sure you're communicating the important things every single day, even if you sound like a parrot. You guys have heard me say some certain terms for many, many years, over and over and over. Sometimes maybe you might feel sick hearing me talk about this stuff all the time, but it's in your brain and it's stuck and you can't get it out. For those of you that have worked with me for 10 or more years, you all know what those are. You guys can regurgitate this stuff in your sleep. And so we want this to carry on throughout the whole company, so that they know exactly what you're going to talk to them about when they come in at 4 o'clock, because they heard it the day before and the day before and the day before. You're going to get these reminders over and over and over. You want them to really fall into a rut where this is very repetitious. So be afraid of under communicating and the dangers that can happen. Because when you leave it up to other people to interpret and do things the way they believe it should be done, that's a really bad recipe for disaster. And this one combats the law of procrastination. So get it done now. Don't let the sun go down. It's really easy sometimes when we have an important problem that we need to deal with to let it fester and then push it off till tomorrow, and then push it off till tomorrow, and then the next day and the next day. And we do this sometimes because we just think it's going to go away if we don't deal with it. Maybe it'll just fix itself. Maybe they'll just kind of it'll patch itself up and it won't be a problem anymore. Well, that hardly ever happens, right? It's better to deal with it right away so it doesn't become worse down the road. So if it's a top priority, schedule it, protect it, and do it. So if it's a meeting that you need to have with somebody, or you need to talk with them about their performance, or help get them on track, schedule it, protect that time. Don't let anything get in the way, and then do it. Do it. Don't let it fester on. Don't be afraid to confront just because you're afraid that what somebody's going to think of you, or whatever it is. You gotta deal with it. You gotta rip the Band-Aid off, and you gotta deal with it. Get it done. So procrastination will just make things worse. If it's not a top priority, delegate it, delay it, or remove it. So if it's not something worthy of your time, maybe you can delegate it. Have your assistant manager deal with it. Have your shift leader deal with it, or remove it if it's not really that important. Don't worry about it. Get it off your plate, so it's not going to take up your time. Stay ahead of your solutions, not falling behind, multiplying your problems. So you got to stay ahead of it. If there's a problem, deal with it. Then there's no problems. If you just let your problems pile up one after another, after another, after another, you fall too far behind, and there's no way to get caught back up. Think of a person that keeps charging a bunch of money on a credit card. At first you think, okay, it's not a big deal, I can pay that back. But then down the road, if you just keep that habit going over and over and over, then before you know it, you've got so much money charged on your credit card, you're so in over your head, there's no way that you're going to be able to do this. So your tendency then is to bail. I've seen people let problems pile up so much in their store that their only option is to quit and move on to a place where they don't have problems and they can start fresh. Okay. Don't let that happen. Stay ahead of your problems by getting it done and not procrastinating. All right. Number 6, whatever you want to have, give even more. So be your best. This is the margin effect. If somebody asks you to do 5 units of something, do 6 units of something. Invest in others and they will invest in you. Raise your value to others. Do more than what's expected, that type of a thing. And your reward will be even greater. Sacrifice always comes before reward. Don't reap before you sow. Okay. Sometimes we want to reap before we sow. We want to get paid before we actually do the work. And then we get paid and then we don't do the work, right? Ever seen that? Contractors that make you pay up front. You pay them and then they don't come back. Those are people that want to reap it before they sow. But we need to have the perspective that we always need to sow before we reap. Prove yourself, go above and beyond, and then you'll reap something and you'll be worth more. And the next time you'll reap more. So you're always raising your value. So whatever you have to do. So don't do as little as you have to because you have more time to do it. Get it done as quickly as you can, and maybe even a little quicker the next time. And regardless of what has been expected of you as far as time, you're doing the best you can and you're improving yourself, and your value will skyrocket. If we're always doing as little as we have to, our value will never skyrocket. It'll just stay the same or go down. So, okay, now that you've understand several different ideas from Parkinson's law, I want to talk about big rocks. Big rocks is a little bit different of a concept that we've been talking about for the last month or so. And it's a different concept than what than what most of us are used to. Usually in leadership roles, we're used to being held accountable for our results, for what the sales report says at the end of the week or the end of the month or the end of the quarter. Okay, so what are big rocks? So big rocks are not goals. They're not goals. So you don't want to use, I'm going to work on hitting my labor. That's not a big rock. Okay, I'm going to work on cutting hours. That's not really even a big rock either. And so we're not talking about goals. These are not things that are going to be reported later that we'll find out whether we did well or did not do well at. Okay. Big rocks are daily habits that combat Parkinson's law. Okay. All of those things that we just got done talking about, big rocks are daily habits. So these are things that you do daily that can combat Parkinson's law. And if you don't do these things, or if you don't change and learn these things better, then Parkinson's law will keep you disabled in certain areas, or at least limited in certain areas of your work, and you'll never be able to get over the top and hit those results that you want to hit. Okay. So they're daily habits of things that you need to do daily. Okay. Big rocks should not feel natural and are uncomfortable by design. Big rocks are not something that you need to just keep doing that you're not struggling with. That's not what the big rocks are for. Big rocks are to take something that's holding you back, overcome it so it doesn't hold you back anymore. It's like removing an obstacle or getting over a hurdle, okay? And it's supposed to be a little bit uncomfortable, and it's just not going to be natural. You're not going to do it by just more experience, just by doing the same thing you're doing for a longer amount of time. That's not going to get you where you need to get. You need to push yourself. You need to be pushed by others as well. So it's something that's going to be a little bit uncomfortable. Big rocks are about you and your inefficiencies, not your team. This is really important. This is about you. My big rocks are about me. It's not the things that I need to improve in our company. It's not the things that I need to communicate to my leaders. It's about me. What are the things that I am holding myself back from because of either my lack of understanding, my willful stubbornness, my bad habits, my work ethic, whatever it is, my fixed mindset possibly. But these are all about me, okay, and how I need to work on me to get myself better. Because here's the thing. If I'm not working on me to get better, but I'm working on the big rocks of someone else and trying to get you to do things differently, I'm just a control freak then. I'm just trying to control other people instead of controlling the only thing that I really actually have control over, and that is me. But if I can make myself better, then I can be an influence for people. I can help to influence people so they can look at that and say, wow, he's improved himself. Maybe I can improve myself. Agreeing and committing to improving yourself is much more desirable and doable than obedience because somebody else wants to get something more out of you for their sake. So this is a way for us to improve ourselves. So it's all about you personally and not your team or your company even. Big rocks are constant and consistent pressure to redirect your behavior. Think of it like braces. You know, if anybody's ever had braces, I've never had braces before, but I've known a lot of people that have. And so the whole idea is that it creates pressure on something that's crooked, and it pushes it slightly to a straighter place, but it takes time. It takes time to do that, but it has to be consistent. You can't just put on braces 3 times a month and have it be effective, right? It has to be constant pressure. You can't work out 3 times a month and lose any weight. It has to be constant pressure to redirect your behavior, and it has to be one day after another of consistent progress that will kind of get longer term results.